Just like an orchestra, each member of which plays their own unique role in creating a symphony, consider our economy or even a simple organizational structure. Each component or individual contributes their unique input to create an output that's coherent, functional, and beneficial. The underlying structure that governs this transmission of information from inputs to outputs, allowing each part to play its role, is what we'll delve into today. The transmission of variety is presented in Chapter 8 of Ashby's An Introduction to Cybernetics. Welcome back to the Economancer. So, this is your home for knowledge on economics, public policy, and cybernetics. So, today we're going to be continuing our journey on Ashby's insightful work, An Introduction to Cybernetics. We left off with looking at variety in chapter 7, so here we're jumping into the transmission of variety for chapter 8. This is going to be tackling intriguing concept of the transmission of variety. And so what we're really thinking about as we're going through this is the power of cybernetics, not in this like crazy quasi weird way of people thinking it as like cyber reality and all of this. The fundamental power of cybernetics lies in its ability to make sense of a myriad of processes that unfold around us every day. Now we're going to explore how variety leads to differences, or how variety and differences move through systems and shape the world as we know it. So the first thing to consider is the ubiquity of coding. And so what you can think of coding is I say something, you hear it, you then start processing what was said. That is a code. Codes are ubiquitous. So this is similar to the unique roles that was played by each member of the orchestra. Every word, every action, and every event that we experience is a coded message. And as we'll see, the process of coding and transmitting these messages is a dance of complexity and simplicity. So we go to, wow, I totally forgot I was doing this. Yeah, boom. So, look at that. So in A3, Ashby delves into the complexity of coding. So just as an orchestra's symphony arises from an intricate mesh of individual notes, the complexity of coding emerges from the unique combination of numerous, seemingly simple codes. However, as Ashby points out, there may be underlying patterns that simplify this complexity, a notion we'll explore further in the context of decoding and also further in the context of complexity theory itself, and how no matter the amount of complexity, there may be a way to reduce all of the complexity into a single state. Um, Eventually, I will try to work on the first and second laws of complexity, and the second law of complexity, much like the law of thermodynamics, and later on that we'll discuss the law of requisite variety. There does seem to be like a conclusion for this. So, decoding. So, the decoding process, as we were just talking about, is the unraveling of the melody of a symphony note by note. When decoding, the message or the entire symphony becomes the operand rather than the individual note. Ashby highlights the fascinating fact that a one-to-one transformation can retain the variety of the original message throughout the coding and decoding process, ensuring the original melody remains unchanged. So, coding by instrumentation. So, in 8.5, he delves into the world of coding by machine instrumentation. Much like how a conductor brings together various instruments to create a harmonious performance, coding by machine instrumentation involves various components working together to translate messages. Ashby brings in the work of Shannon and Weaver, elucidating the concept of a message and machine and the integral role of a transducer in transforming states. In coding by machine instrumentation, he discusses the critical role of machines or systems that transform input data into coded messages, drawing from the pioneering work of Shannon and Weaver in this information theory. A machine is to be a set of states that undergoes changes over time according to a defined transformation process. In this, the concept of a message here is crucial. A message represents a succession of states resulting from the interaction between two systems. It carries the variety or the information from one system to another. In the world of cybernetics, these messages can be seen as vectors carrying multiple pieces of information simultaneously. This understanding of messages and transducers has a profound impact on fields like communications, computing, and systems theory. In economics, for example, it shapes our understanding of how markets process information. Each transaction in a market can be seen as a message. And this is, again, this is the primary work of individuals such as Hayek and even Friedman to some lesser extent in price signaling. So that each transaction in a market can be seen as the message, conveying a variety of information, so variety and the information as the variety, including the value of goods, the willingness of consumers to pay, and the capacity of producers to supply. In public policy, the understanding these principles of messages transmission can help design more effective communication strategies. For example, knowing how to code messages about health interventions in a way that can be correctly decoded by a diverse community can greatly enhance the impact of these interventions. And so that's something to think about also when it comes to any of these topics, when it comes to political science. How do we get the communication out there to the broad sectors of the population, right? So let's say we have this, really novel idea about what we're going to be doing for a policy like healthcare, and we're trying to get all of this information out, and you have all this missing ways to complete this information. There's no redundancy in it. Like, you're saying these things to me like I'm supposed to know what's going on. You can go look at the work of Econ John and in his work on health informatics, etc. And you can see just how unbelievably difficult it is. And then you're trying to give this high level mathematical representation of what's happening in the sphere of medicine out to the population. It's almost impossible. But we have to be able to build these communication strategies so that people understand what's going on, right? So in all of these applications, the key insight here is recognizing that any system, be it a market or a government or a computer, is fundamentally a transducer operating to transform and transmit in the form of coded messages this understanding. So understanding these principles in general, as elucidated by thinkers like Ashby, Shannon, and Weaver, equip us with a better way to go about doing stuff. Okay. Code is a messenger carrier. So again, Ashby examines the role of codes as message carriers. He presents a scenario involving a transducer, similar how a conductor guides the orchestra. If a conductor gives a single command, it's challenging to interpret inversely. However, if they guide the orchestra step by step, the process of inverting becomes feasible, contextual to the orchestration. So in section 8.7, he goes into this idea of coding and inverting and stuff like that, like I was just explaining there. This scenario makes a lot of sense and a lot of people don't understand. So we have this input. So we have Q, that's a system. It's going to be providing an input. Then we have R. R is this channel that's going to be giving information. And then we see that it's coded and then it's going to a delayer. What is that delayer doing? It's allowing it to catch up in time. So because there's a difference between the utterance or something like that of the information, it has to have a delaying propagation. And people don't realize this, but that's what the brain does, right? So you see stuff and then you have to process it. So your brain will actually delay things. That's why you have an anticipatory or an expectation system that's associated with a lot of the things that you do. That's why if you throw a ball, you have an idea of roughly where it's at, so that by the time you're getting caught up, that anticipation function is reading everything. That's why hitting a baseball is like such a hard task if someone's throwing like a curveball versus like a straight down the line fastball. Even though the speed is more difficult, it's not as difficult because it's easier to know the motion of the ball itself. And that's the importance of delayers. And then again, inverter means whatever code was given, we just flip it and there we go. So in 8.9, he's discussing the possibility of designing an inverter and the critical role of determinists. So much like reversing a piece of music without losing its essence, as we were talking about, if a machine retains distinctions, it is possible to construct another machine that will produce the original message. By constructing this inverter, it's likely composing a symphony backwards. It requires the use of a delayer machine to account for the time differences between notes, highlighting that determinants. So, transmitting variety, this is where we get into the key aspects of what's going on. He addresses the concept of transmitting variety, just like an orchestra can perform a variety of symphonies. A variety of transducers can exist, potentially similar in construction, but each occupying a different state at any given moment. Because the transducer does not have variety, it is a transmission of it, but transducers can have variety because they all exist in different states. And that's really important when we think about transmission from one step. So Ashby gives us this vital law of transmission of variety. It's as though we have a well-versed orchestra, teen, T, and then we have this amateur orchestra, U. The variety that the amateur orchestra can gain from the well-versed one cannot be more than what the latter can offer. This fundamental law reveals the limitation of transmitting variety in one step. Ashby's law on the transmission of variety is of paramount importance. Honestly, it's one of the most important laws. In the context of transmission at one step, the law essentially states that a system, in this case denoted U, can only gain as much variety as the system it is interacting with, denoted T. This can provide. So the fundamental law of information theory, essentially, you cannot extract more information or variety from T than what T has. This principle is fundamental in understanding the limitations in information flow. This also goes into how fast it can be picked up, the speed of communication, so on and so forth. But in the context of like economics and public policy, the principle can be applied to various scenarios. For example, think about economic forecasting, right? They can only provide as much variety or accuracy as the data they are built on. If the data lacks the variety, let's say, for example, it lacks sufficient data about emerging markets, then the forecasting model will be limited in its ability to predict economic trends in these markets. That's why predicting in markets is usually like a short run thing. Well, hold on. Let me say it like this. There's good chances that you can have an idea of the long run, and there's a good chance that you can have an idea in the short run. The medium run, and this is something Luhmann talks about, eventually we'll get to it, about the present future and the future present, maybe, and how this plays into like forecasting, and this is in his book on risk. But ultimately, it's really hard to forecast that medium trend because the short run, we kind of go off of path dependency. In the long run, we go off path dependency. But in that medium run, we don't know what's really going to happen. We don't know what's happening with these emerging markets, how much influence they're going to have on everything and stuff like that. So it's really important to understand in the context of forecasting that there's a, I guess you could say, a violation of the law of transmission of variety. Well, it doesn't violate it. It explains it, why it's like limited. So, 812. So in 812, he's going to deepen our understanding. So what this is about, this is the transmission at the second step. So you can see what it looks like at the first step. At the second step, this is going to be, imagine an amateur orchestra still had some teachings left from a well-versed one. Can they continue to increase their variety? So according to Ashby, the orchestra's variety cannot exceed the number of symphonies it can play, no matter how many teachings are left. The interplay between the states of T and the states of U in the same machine or scenario proves pivotal in this discussion. So again, goes back to what's going on between step 1 and step 2. So transmission through a channel. So again, we're going to be introducing this concept of a transmission through a channel. So akin to music passing through a speaker system, a channel acts as an intermediate transducer with a finite number of states. However, given enough time, like an extended performance, the channel can transmit any variety, encapsulating the true essence of the original source. Although I will say, I don't think that all of the information is exhausted by that source. I think that's not a full conclusion, but that's a philosophical issue rather than a scientific one. So, transmission through a channel is essentially about how much variety can be transported from one system to another through some specific pathway. Ashby states that the capacity of a transducer to transmit variety is proportional to the product of its capacity in bits and numbers of steps taken in. In other words, given enough time, any transducer can transmit any amount of variety. But this is like an almost infinite scale. So when we talk about a channel in economics or public policy, it can be anything that allows information to flow from one place to another. It could be a network of financial institutions, the internet, social media platforms, or even traditional media outlets. Each of these channels has its own capacity for transmitting variety. One of the most prominent things that is called the channel would be the channel of monetary policy. So you have the risk channel, you have the interest rate channel, etc. All of these different channels, what they're doing is they're giving information to flow from, say, the market into monetary and vice versa, or what the market is doing, or I'm sorry, what the monetary policy is doing and how it influences the market. And then you can also look at this from disseminating public policy decisions. Social media can rapidly transmit a wide variety of reactions and analyses about the policy, thus impacting public perception and response to that policy. However, the depth and the complexity of the discourse may be limited compared to like longer form channels like academic papers or policy briefings. Understanding the strengths and limitations of different channels can greatly inform strategy in these fields. That's why there are certain monetary economists who focus on a singular uh, transmission channel of monetary policy. Again, someone will be mostly focusing on their study on risk. And then again, when we look at the discourse difference between an academic paper versus talking to somebody on the street, this goes back to 8.4 that we were just talking about how we understand and how we're trying to make sure people know what's going on in public policy. So, in section 8.14, Ashby elaborates on how Q, R, and S, they form this chain of transmission, as you can see. Despite the limitation that R cannot gain any more variety after the initial step that was earlier, S can still accrue variety step by step from R. This process unfolds because the output from R, taken step by step as a sequence, forms a vector. Importantly, the variety in a vector can surpass the variety in its individual components. If the number of components in a vector can increase indefinitely, the vector's variety can augment without limit, even if the variety in each component remains capped. For example, the sequence of 10 coin spins can express a variety up to 1024 values, even though each spin component can only result in 2 outcomes. And again, this is really important when we're considering stuff for policy. So in this system, R represents the channel connecting the system Q to the system S. As the transmission process unfolds, system S receives and is altered by the entire sequence, the entire vector, gaining much more variety than initially possible. In essence, a limited channel capacity can be compensated for by increasing the sequence's length, maintaining this constant total variety of transmission. This intriguing observation, first noticed in previous sections, becomes a recurrent theme in later discussions, especially when it comes to information theory, especially when it comes to communications theory. This is all about Shannon's work and trying to find the bounds of actual channels, and then what we do in like information technology and stuff like that, where we're trying to expand how much information can flow given we have this limited channel capacity and what type of sequences and redundancies. But again, let's move this back into public policy. So let's say we have this implementation of a comprehensive health reform. At each policymaking step, the reform can only move in two broad directions towards either increasing or decreasing public health expenditure. That's R. That is our channel. Yet, as the steps accumulate, forming the vector, the total variety of policy outcomes in the health reforms can exceed these two possibilities. Again, this would be consensus and confliction. The vector could result in an array of outcomes from substantial increases in public health investment, minor decreases in other compensatory measures, to a complete restructuring of health's resource allocation. Despite each step's dichotomous choice, the comprehensive policy change, the vector can possess a much greater variety. Now, here's the crazy part. If it has to go to policy, you take this um, scenario of these two ideas, increase or decrease. Those turn into a plethora, an almost infinite amount of ideas. Those ideas have to be reduced again to a yes or no choice so it can be a bill. And that bill will be a yes or no. That's why bills are so long and ridiculous these days, because they're packing in so much information, because they're not really understanding what's going on in this channel. They're trying to overpack this channel with sequences, and it does a very bad job. And that's one of the fundamental problems in our bill making processes. And this, again, this isn't unknown to cyberneticians. They've been pointing this out to political scientists, to economists since the days of, Ashby in the 1950s. Like, come on, guys. We know y'all are messing this up. Please fix it. So, delay. Now, this is really cool. So, the concept of delay in information transmission, much like a pause in a musical performance, this delay highlights the fact that information transmission is a step-by-step process, often requiring external components to intake and process external information. And also, you have to think about it like, let's say there's a fiscal policy change. And this is what fiscal policy versus monetary policy, and how those two systems are different. A fiscal policy change has a lagged effect. So let's look at TARP. When TARP got released, all this money got released. There are still places that are still spending that TARP money. So all of that information, that money that's being put out, you've got to take it. It's got to go to be a bill. Once it's a bill, it's got to get passed. Once it's passed, it's got to get divvied out. Once it's divvied out, it's got to get redivvied out, right? So it'll go to the federal, to the state, to the county, to the city, etc. So it's got to go down these different paths. Then once it gets to the city, then they have to delegate what they're going to be using it for. Then they have to pay someone to help project the plan and do all this. And then by the time that rubber meets the road, it's been like 6 months to a year, maybe even longer. And this is the delay of information transmission that we're talking about here. And that's why it's unbelievably important to always focus on what would have the most immediate effect versus what is the long run effect. Because a lot of people think, well, if I just get this money, I have this immediate effect. That may be true, but then you have to look at how that's going to be affecting down the line and whether or not that's actually going to be impactful. Because like TARP money, by the time TARP was running through the economy after the 08 recession, 08-09 recession, it took so long that it didn't have much of an impact on the economy itself, because the economy was already trying to rebound, re-equilibrate, go back into homeostasis, whatever you want to say. And so this influx of money or this spending, and it's trickling in, it doesn't do enough for the system itself. And so it's just wasted money almost. All right. So two-system feedback. This is pretty simple. So Ashby elaborates on this concept of a two-system feedback in a determinate system. Much like the back and forth between a conductor and the orchestra, feedback in a system does not lead to an increase in variety within the system. This key interplay of feedback and variety is an essential understanding for the dynamics of complex systems. A lot of people think that when there's feedback between these systems, that's building more variety. It's not. Just assume that there is an equal amount of variety that's happening between these two. But let's say it's revealing more of that variety. Just because you're interacting with the thing and learning more about it, that doesn't mean that its initial variety is 0 or 1, and then the more information you learn about it, it becomes more complex itself. That's not what it says. It just says it's this complex, and we have to reveal it step by step. And this feedback in this system helps us reveal that. Okay, interference. That's a very cool thing. So vector messages, etc. So Ashby discusses this phenomenon of interference. What happens when two pieces of music are played simultaneously? Do they destroy each other, or can we still make sense of each piece individually? Ashby suggests that so long as the received form of the message preserves or exceeds the variety in the original, the interactive is non-destructive, allowing for harmonious intermingling of the two pieces of music. So you can kind of think about this with the different types of music you listen to. Put in an earbud in one ear and an earbud in the other and have two different types of music playing at the same time. It will become really annoying. But you put on something that, even if they're different types of music, are very harmonically similar, or I guess you could say tempo and stuff like that similar, which is like the mashup songs that everybody likes to listen to, like Gangster's Paradise done in rock and whatever. The goal is to find this harmony, this balance between the two and connect them. But you can definitely think of a system like you have a pipe with an alkaline and an acid liquid, and you pour them down the same pipe. Yeah, you're going to have negative things happen. You're going to destroy everything. So that's the key here in understanding what interference is, especially when we're thinking about people communicating, right? If you're talking to two people, you may not be able to focus on both of them at the same time. But just because one person's talking and you can focus on the other one may go in the background. You may not be paying attention to them. But if they're saying the same thing at the same time, if you focus on one of them, you're getting the same message. And so that's really important to understand. There's a lot that goes into this idea of interference, and I think it's going to be continuing forward as we move on to the next chapter. Because if I'm not mistaken, I'm actually going to look out. I want to make sure I don't say this because I've said some dumb stuff before. Incessant transmission is the next chapter, which um, I don't know why it's called incessant. So, with this, we conclude our deep dive into Chapter 8, Transmission of Variety, from Ross Ashby's An Introduction to Cybernetics. So, we explore the ubiquity and complexity of coding, decoding, machine instrumentation, inversion. We delved into this relationship between transducers and the principles of transmitting variety. As we continue to uncover the mysteries of cybernetics and its applications in economics and public policy, remember to subscribe the Economancer for more thought provoking discussions. And until next time, have a good one.